Good morning. Welcome to today's class on James chapter 4, 13 to 17. Today is Independence Day, and I am taking a few days of vacation, so I've recorded this early so that you'll have the class this morning, even though I'm not teaching at Waterview today. But I think I like this class. I like what it says. This is one of those lessons, one of those passages that have ingrained itself into my life. And so I just wanted to take some time to share with you some things I see out of this passage, things that I hope you'll get something out of. When we're born, we begin as a baby rolling around in a crib. We're full of promise, full of hope. And then we'll flip over one day, we'll get on all fours, and a toddler begins to crawl away. Then he hops up on 2 feet and he runs away. And children skip to school and do all kinds of wonderful things. They grow into teenagers who want to do nothing more than be free, to gain a driver's license so they have the freedom of the road. They become college students who want in their lives to develop something important, to make a mark in the world, to find their place, to get a job and a career. And they move into middle age, and a mother or a father is sending a child off to college far faster than they thought they would. And then they have to ask themselves, what do we do now? And they find time as an empty nester. And then they get older. They begin to move toward retirement. No longer will their lives be defined by their jobs or their tasks, which is a real problem. What do you do when you're not who you said you were? And then it begins to move into the winter of life, where plans cannot be made except for funerals and burials, and they end. The perspective we have of life is an interesting one for us, that we believe a lot of things about life. When we're young, it will go on forever. When we're old, we demolish that nonsense. And James wants to give us perspective on that. He wants us to look at ourselves in this lesson. After all, what we do with ourselves is the most important part of this lesson. How do you see it? How do you see yourself? How should you see yourself? How should you look at your life? What should you do with your life? Those are those kinds of questions that never quite get old and never quite get answered either. But today, James would like to help us gain a little perspective on something we like to ignore on a regular basis. Mankind brings to the world a certain amount of hubris. Hubris is the concept that I can do whatever I want to do. It is an arrogance born of power, born of control. We all like control. We all feel like we need control. In fact, the number one reason people burn out in their jobs is they feel like they have no control of anything at all. And yet the illusion of control is a dangerous thing. And that's what James speaks of first, this illusion that we have, this magician's cape that we throw over life that says we can have something that we don't really have. It is perhaps best captured in a poem called Invictus by William Ernest Henley. Out of the night that covers me, black as the pit from pole to pole, I think whatever gods may be for my unconquerable soul. In the fell clutch of circumstance, I have not winced nor cried aloud. Under the bludgeonings of chance, my head is bloodied, but unbowed. Beyond this place of wrath and tears looms but the horror of the shade, and yet the menace of the years finds and shall find me unafraid. It matters not how strait the gate, how charged with punishments the scroll. I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul. That captures so well our current environment. We are the captains of our souls. We can do as we please, when we please, how we please. We have all the resources we need. We have all the time that we need. And we can control life with our own grasp. James brings this out in the very first verse of our lesson today, verse 13. Now listen, You who say, today or tomorrow, we will go to this or that city and spend a year there carrying on business and making money. Oh, James says, examine that thought carefully and listen to yourself when you talk. Here's what it means. I have time and I control it. Isn't that how we look at life? This past week, I made 4 different appointments, one several months out. I am certain that those things will take place, or I would not have put on the appointments. I make a daily to-do list. This is my intention. This is what I will do. Sounds very much like James. Today or tomorrow, I have my life in my hands. I can do as I please with it. We wear a watch on our wrist. We look at a clock on our computer. And we see the tick of time, but believe that that means nothing. We will do what we want to do when we want to do it. I have the time, and I control it. No one can tell me what to do. See, that's an illusion. Because the second part of that illusion is I can do what I want. These people said, today or tomorrow, we will go to this or that city, and we'll stay a year, and we'll make money. Think about the pregnancy of that statement. The time is mine because I can go today or tomorrow, and I can spend a year. But beyond that, I can pick the city, this or that city, and I can decide how it's going to be used. And I can decide that I can do this or I can do that. I can make my own plans. I can do with my time what I want because I'm the master and commander. I am the captain of my soul. James comes to that concept of human pride. But as C.S. Lewis reminds us, pride is what gave the devil his creation. And those who use it are sons of the devil. This is the problem we all face in our lives. We like this illusion. We like to think we can make this happen when I want to happen on the timetable I want it to take place. I sit in too many meetings where we put things on calendars and say this is what's going to happen. Do we? Because James presents another reality. The reality is life is fragile. Handle with care. I want you to think about some things. In January of 2020, I got on a plane, went to Nicaragua and came back, got off. I started arranging my year. This is what's going to have to be. This is what's going to take place at certain times. On March the 13th, every plan I made turned to toast. Nothing could be done. Meetings had to be changed. The way we did summer series had to be altered. Our expectations of the future kept changing with the week. Who would have guessed on January the 1st, 2020, what it would be like on December the 31st, 2020? Who would have been able to say this is what life was going to be? Because life is fragile. When my children were growing up, my oldest was in high school, my youngest was in junior high. My oldest had a good friend in high school. He was like any high school boy. He was ready to get his driver's license, get a job, and make some money, and so he did. He was 16 years old. He got a job at the movie theater at the local mall, which required him to stay out a little later than usual. One night he was coming home, and he hit the soft caliche shoulder. And an experienced driver would know exactly what to do, but an inexperienced one was different. Instead, he tried to swerve, and when he did, the car turned sideways in front of an oncoming dump truck, which struck him and killed him. He was 16 years old. I had a friend of mine whose kids were exactly the same age. I remember talking to him, and he asked me a question. He said, what do I tell my kids? What do I tell my girls? That's a hard question to answer, but I had this one. Tell them that life is precious. Don't waste it. You never know when it's going to be gone. See, that's what James wants to tell us. You never know when it's going to be gone. It's too fragile for us to handle with our own hubris. That belongs to God. He goes on to say, why? Why do you do that? Because you don't even know what will happen tomorrow. What is your life? You're a mist that appears for a little while and then vanishes. You don't even know what will happen tomorrow. Tomorrows are always different. On May the 12th, May the 13th was a different day. I didn't know what was going to happen tomorrow then. And it's interesting that we have lived through this, that it gives us a perspective we ought to have, but we're tending to forget it quickly, that you don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. You don't know if there's going to be a traffic accident. You don't know if you're going to have a major illness come up. You don't know what a scan is going to look like and the shadow that is there, and the doctor comes in with a frown on his face. You don't know what's going to happen in your job, whether you're going to be transferred, fired, or promoted. You don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. None of us do. But James says, what is your life? It is nothing more than a mist that appears for a little while and then vanishes. We're in a season of the year right now where when it gets warm, sometimes the humidity of morning begins to bubble up and you get these little vapors that float above the ground, it seems. But give it an hour. When the sun comes up and the heat of the day hits it, it just vaporizes and evaporates. That's what James is saying. That's what our lives are like. It looks like they have substance and suddenly they're gone. What do you do then? That's what your life is all about. You don't know when it's going to be gone, and you don't know when it's going to go. I have on my computer an interesting little program. A lot of people think it's morbid, but I think it's interesting. It's called a death clock. A death clock is simply when they take the actuarial tables and calculate your lifespan based upon your birth date and and the age that you are, and they begin to count it down to 0. If you look at my death clock as it runs, you see it. If you look at my death clock as it runs, you see it. Tick, tick, tick. The seconds are counting down. The minutes are counting down. The hours are counting down. The days are counting down. But even with that clock, it may be wrong. It may stop at any time. And you never know when. What is your life? That you can make the kind of plans, because it's the vapor that disappears. Several years ago now, I was in the last 2 weeks of the year and I was on vacation. I'd planned a lot of things. I thought we were going to do a lot of things. On Monday, I did something. I went to go see an exhibition on the Dead Sea Scrolls and enjoyed it. But on my way home, I thought, I need to swing by and see my dad, who was in an assisted living center. And I said, he probably needs a haircut because I know I do. And so let's just go together. We went to the same place. The same girl did it. I picked him up. We went over. He got his haircut. I got my haircut. I came back and he said, I've got something I need you to help me with. I can't write that well anymore, so can you fill out my Christmas checks and I'll sign them? He said, I'm sorry, you'll know what you're going to get. I said, it's okay, it's no problem. So I filled out all of his checks and he signed them. He put them in an envelope. Left them on his little desk in his room at the assisted living center. I got up and said, I'll see you later. I went to bed that night at 10 o'clock. At 10:30, I got a call from the assisted living center that there was a problem with my father. When I got there, he was writhing, in distress, but unaware. The paramedics had met me. They were taking him to the hospital, but one of them told me it doesn't look good. When we got to the hospital, the doctor confirmed our worst fears. He had had a massive stroke and his brain was bleeding out, and there was nothing they could do surgically to stop it. It was going to happen. He was going to die. 45 minutes later, he passed from this life. I never anticipated the day ending the way it ended. I never anticipated that. And suddenly, my vacation began funeral planning, settling estates, dealing with grief, calling family, struggling with things, all in the days preceding Christmas. Nothing was as was planned, for life is a vapor that disappears in just a moment. James wants to remind us our lives do not depend on the tick of the clock. It does not depend on the plans that we make. It does not follow our calendars, whether electronic or paper. It doesn't care about our plans. Our lives depend on God. God is the one who holds time in His hand. God is the one that gives us what we need. And God is the one who will control the events of life ultimately. Oh, we can plan, and it's good to plan. It's good to have ideas. It's good to say, this is what I'd like to do, but don't count on it. It may not happen. Because you see, James says, instead you ought to say, if the Lord wills. Now, it's not the verbiage and the verbalizing that's important, but James wants to drive something home to these people. When he says, instead of saying today or tomorrow, say, if the Lord wills, he's trying to get them to see something. And if you want to say it, that's fine, because anytime you have to verbalize something, anytime you have to put it out and tell someone else, it tends to stick better. The best teacher is the best student is the one who has to teach the lesson. He'll learn better. He knows better because he's processed it. James says if you want to say that, that's fine, but the problem is not just the language you use, because the language can become trite in about 3 sentences. What's important is that you remember it. That no matter what happens in life, if the Lord wills, then that's what's going to happen. And depend on the grace of the Lord to do what He wants to do in the moment that He gives it to you. And don't worry about the rest of it. If it's the Lord's will, we will live and do this or that. All of our life, all of our time, all of our plans are dependent on the hand of a loving, caring God who knows better than we do. That's a problem that faces many people. They don't see that. They don't understand it. Jesus told a story in Luke chapter 12. We call it the parable of the rich fool. It's about money, but it's about more than that, I think. One of the great things about the parables is they had multi-layered meanings that you can pick a lot of things out of. It's the story of a rich farmer. He is wildly successful. He has bumper crops coming in. His barns are not big enough. And so he tears down those barns to build even bigger ones so he can store the grain. And he sits down and he comforts himself. He's proud of himself. He's arrogant of himself. He says, and I'll say to myself, you have plenty of grain laid up for many years. Take your life easy. Eat, drink, and be merry. But God will say to him, you fool, this very night your life will be demanded of you. This very night. Whatever plans he had evaporated, because God was giving the time and taking the time away. If the Lord wills, this is what's going to happen. Tragically, most people don't believe either in the Lord or His will. But just because you don't believe in gravity doesn't mean you should jump off the Empire State Building. The truth is still the truth. God controls our lives and our time. And we need to understand that we live only under the grace of God and the time that we have. So what we need to do then is align with God. James says if God does indeed control our time and our lives, And we need to stop doing some basic things. He said, as it is, you boast in your arrogant schemes. The arrogant schemes are, I will do this and I will not do this. That's arrogance. To think you control is what you don't control. As it is, you boast in your arrogant schemes. All such boasting is evil. Why? Because boasting always comes out of human pride. The thinking that I can do whatever I want to do, whenever I want to do it. Stop your boasting. You have no way to boast because you don't control it. It's just an illusion. Instead, you ought to say, if the Lord will. See, there is a point in which you align your life with what God wants. I can do this if the Lord wants me to do it. But if the Lord doesn't want me to do it, I am okay with that. I can live with that. I don't have to worry about that. Because the Lord is in control, and I will align my schedule, I will align my life, I will align my wishes and my will to whatever He wants. The wisest man is the one who understands that his life does not belong to him, but is only a gift for a small time, and he treats it as such. Because the time that you have, you use it to do what God gives you to do. That's why James ends this lesson today by saying, if anyone then knows the good they ought to do and doesn't do it, it is sin for them. We usually call that the sin of omission. Think of it differently today. It's not what is left undone. It's what you had time to do that you didn't do when you should have done it. That's sin. If you should have said the nice things to your mother and father but didn't do it, you've left something wrong. If you did not reach out to the person who needed Jesus Christ when you should have, that's sin. Not because you transgressed, but because you didn't use the time God gave you to do what you needed to do. Well, you see, the truth is that God gives us plenty of time to do what we need to do, what is important to do. But God will never give us enough time to do all the things we want to do. And if we have the time to do what God wants us to do, we need to do what God wants us to do and not worry about what we want. Because if we want what God wants, we will do what God wants and we will be happy with it. That's part of the problem in this passage. It seems so simple when you put it in the right perspective, but most people don't. They go to church on Sunday and they hear the sermons, they sing, "Oh, how I love Jesus," and they'll make their calendar differently. Why? Because they think they control their life. When James says the reality is that your life is a gift, handed to you wrapped up every morning when you wake up, and you unwrap and you use, and at night it goes away. And if you're lucky, a gift will be replaced the next day, but it will be gone that day. How many gifts will you throw in the trash when you should have been doing the will of God? Because God gives you the gift to use for His glory. The great tragedy of life is most people use their life the way they want, and at the end say, "I wish I hadn't." Perhaps one of the worst words in the human language is regret. Regret is the sense that I should have done what I could have done when I had the chance, but now the chance is gone. One of my favorite writers is a man named Clay Christensen. Christensen was a business professor at Harvard University. He was different in that what he taught was about disruptive technology such as Uber and Amazon. But more importantly, I think, he was a devoted follower to Christ. He refused to work on Sundays because that was time for family and faith. He got fired from one job on his way up for doing that. because he knew what was right to do with his time and how to live his life well. Tragically, he died far too young, about 6 weeks before the pandemic began in our country. I wish he would have stayed because of his wisdom, but I'm glad that he lived because of his wisdom. He wrote a book that was called How Do You Measure Your Life? It's a book written mainly to younger people, but as an older man I read it, and it makes more sense now. For life one day will all be measured. And when it's measured, the question is, do you like how it's measured up? Here's what he wrote. Somehow after all of this, I came to understand that while many of us might default to measuring our lives by summary statistics, such as the number of people presided over, the number of awards we've received, or dollars accumulated in a bank, and so on, the only metrics that truly matter to my life are the individuals whom I've been able to help, one by one, to become better people. And he leaves it with the question, so how will you measure yours? The reality is the clock is always ticking in our lives until it ticks to the end. And every second we have, every moment we live, is the gift of God. So how will you use God's gift today? Thank you for joining me, and I'll be back with you again next Sunday morning.